Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today, I'll be surprised, we're back in Jurassic World Evolution 2. So hopefully we're going to be finishing up this series soon. There's one mod I really want to talk about, but I haven't had the chance to. But, there seems to be some mods still coming out for this game, so I'll carry on, because why not? So we've got part 104 for Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people are making and compare them to the real-life fossil counterparts. So today we've got actually quite an interesting assortment. A lot of marine animals, and we've got a pterosaur, and then a couple dinosaurs as well. So a lot of kind of underrated classics today. So it seems to be quite cool. So first up, we actually, our first two species are not actually official species. They're like reskins for the marine feeder. So we're going to have a look in here today. We're going to start off with the Leptolepis. Let's see if we can find a school hanging out in here. Perfect, there we go. We'll have a look at these little fishies. So again, they are a remaster of the tuna feeder, and same with the other ones as well. Let's see how close we can get. So this is Leptolepis, or Leptolepis, if you say that. I'm not actually 100% sure how you say it, but these are really cool little fish. So these guys means in Latin basically the slight scale. These guys are an extinct genus of stem teleost fish, so that's basically the ancestors of modern bony fish, or big group of bony fish, that lived in what now is Europe, in areas like Germany, France, England, Greece, Luxembourg, and the north of Africa, and it lived during the Jurassic period. For the longest time, this genus was actually used as a waste bucket taxon. So basically, a lot of small fish that people didn't really understand what they were. They're like, oh, no, it's Leptolepis. I believe you say that. Basically, it was this genus, and then they just threw it in there just as a species, because why not? In 1974, the Swedish ichthyologist Ova Nauben revised the genus and restricted to 7 species. And then a lot of other was actually reassigned to different genera, so they managed to kind of sort it out a bit, which is interesting. And in terms of where it fits on the family tree, its closest relatives is Eocarcharia, which is another really basal teleost. Very, very interesting little fishy. In terms of its size, these guys weren't too big. They got about 8.5 centimeters, or 3 inches in length. And they superficially, because they're not really closely related to modern herring at all, but they do superficially resemble the modern herring, which is again unrelated. While more basal teleosts, such as a Paralititan, has skeletons that are both a mixture of bone and cartilage, these guys are more similar to modern bony fish, as they do have fully calcified skeletons, so they do have a proper skeleton, just like a modern fish would have. Like a modern bony fish, not just a mix, not like a shark. It had a proper skeleton, which is interesting. Another modern development as well, it had cycloid scales, which lacked the covering of granite that was present in more basal members, so it's a little bit more similar to modern fish. And these two developments actually made swimming quite a bit easier, as the bony spine was now more resilient to pressure caused by swimming, so it was a little bit more hydrodynamic. Mass graves have also been found, and this shows that the species very likely lived in schools, as you can see is kind of depicted here. Which would have provided some protection from predators while these guys were plankton feeders, so they fed on plankton and there was filtering. Pelagosaurus was a known predator of these guys. Is actually a fossil of Pelagosaurus with a fossil of Leptolepis in its stomach. And Clarkeichthys, which is a type of extinct cephalopod, has been found with specimens in its arms and could have potentially been prey. And also the pterosaur Dorognathus actually has remains of the species in its stomach as well, so it's quite a common prey species. But yeah, really, really cool. Another cool little fishy, so I'll let you swim off and do your thing, of course. And now we got to find another one. So let's see if we can find our other one. So this one's a species of Ammonite, so let's see if we can find it there. Here we go. Oh. There we go. See, that wasn't too hard. I was actually worried it would be a lot harder to find them, but that seems to be doing pretty good today. So this is... Ooh. There we go, perfect. So this is another species. So this is Aristoceras, which is a type of Ammonite. So Aristoceras in Latin means starhorn. And these guys are an extinct species of cephalopod belonging to the Ammonites, as I mentioned before. It is called the Eocarcharia feeder. It's not called the Ammonite feeder, but still really cool. So these were fast-moving neotenic carnivores. So these guys fed on plankton and stuff like that. Very similar to modern actually nautiluses, and they lived during the Jurassic and Jurassic periods from about 205 to 189 million years ago. So, and actually around the same time as Leptolepis, which is interesting as well. And there's about 4 different species. There's Obstrum and Stellare, which also known as the true star ammonite. They weren't too big. They reach a diameter of about 90 centimeters or 21 inches, so they were kind of decent sized. They're really, really cool in that regard. And in terms of the distribution, these guys were found in Jurassic marine strata in Canada, China, Germany, Hong Kong, Hungary, Peru, and Turkey, and Jurassic in the United States and in the Lyme Regis, with the species Eocarcharia obsterum zone in the upper Silurian. So that's the early Jurassic, I believe. Yeah, the lower early Jurassic, around 999 to 192 million years ago. Is that kind of where it puts it? Not too much. It's not that visually so distinct from other ammonites, but it's a great basic ammonite. If you think of an ammonite, you probably most likely think of this species because of where it's found. Likely you get a lot of fossils of these guys, and they're actually used, as I mentioned, as a biostrategic fossil. So that's when paleontologists and geologists use different fossils in different times to kind of define what layers are different time zones. So you can have one species in this one, and then it's the next species on top and another species below. So it's used to actually figure out what is actually happening in the strata. So that's quite cool there. But yeah, that's the 2 species there. Both done by Trippy 13. So Trippy is going to be definitely dominating this mod pack today. But next up as well, we have also got another species by Trippy that's an actual proper species this time. This is Caturus. Let's have a look at this guy. Let him swim and doing this thing. I don't know why they kind of panic right out of the bat. It's kind of weird. Anyway, we'll have a look. Let's see. We'll have a look. We'll have a look at you. You got a bright head. You look a bit weird. Let's see. Where's one that's actually looking a bit alive? It's actually right. You probably bit. There we go. So the dog's underneath. It's quite funny. Anyway, so this is Caturus. So Caturus, which is named in Latin, means downtail. So these are an extinct genus of predatory marine fish in the family Caturidae and in the order Aminiformes. So its closest living relative is not like a salmon or anything. Its actually closest relative is the modern bowfish. So that's quite interesting as well. And it has been suggested that this genus is a non-monophyletic group with respect to other members of the family. So this is a creature that's going through a lot of taxonomic upheaval, which is interesting. In terms of fossils, this fossil of this genus range from between 200 million years ago to about 140 million years ago. So pretty much from the early Jurassic and right up until the early Cretaceous. So this is very much a Cretaceous, Jurassic Cretaceous species. Let me just close the door real quick. Oh, easy money. All right. As I mentioned, it's had a very confusing taxonomic history, and will continue to be. This genus was originally described by Louis Agassiz from 2 fossil fish. It was called Eotyrannus and Gracilis. There used to be another species of Eotyrannus, which is actually thought to belong to a genus of cobra by the same name, but then is now a subgenus within Naga. However, neither of these species were actually properly described and then that would mean that we are Novadumian. So basically we don't know. And the specimen of Eotyrannus was lost, and Gracilis was actually considered too poorly preserved to consider its own taxon. But then later there was the species Caturus furcatus described. It was essentially described within Pachycormeus, which is a really interesting group of prehistoric fishes that includes not the genus itself, but its family includes things like Leptolepis or Leptolepis and stuff like that. And was described as type species in the genus by Woodward, but it was incorrect as the type specimen of the genus must be the one of the genus already described from it, and these inconsistencies make both of these genera unstable, so that they may get a new name in the future. But yeah, there's a lot of different species of these guys, and there's a lot of that aren't recognized, but there's just a lot of species when I go quite into it. But I'm assuming this is going to be Eocarcharia, which is the original kind of species. This is the type species that the genus is named from. But in terms of distribution, while restricted to only one definitive species, Caturus is present in the Jurassic of the United Kingdom, Germany, the United States, and Cuba, ranging into the early Cretaceous of the United Kingdom and Spain. And indeterminate remains have been found within the Jurassic of France and Portugal, so it is quite a wide-ranging species. It's just quite interesting as well. So let's see what else we can find on Caturus. But yeah, it's a very interesting little fish. You know, it's one of those things that actually I hadn't heard about this fish before. So even I get to learn some things on these mod spotlights, which I always love. You know, if you're never not learning, the day you stop learning is when you die. That's probably the best advice I have been given. So yeah, we're going to let them swim off and do their thing. So next up, we've got a kind of famous animal coming back, which I do love to see. Next up, we have got Ornithocheirus. So let's have a look at this guy, and you can see the skin I picked. Of course, I had to give it to him. So let's have a look at this guy. So this Ornithocheirus probably looks very familiar to you guys. Let's see if we can actually get one in a good lighter. Oh. Do you guys recognize that? Beautiful. Anyway, so this is Ornithocheirus, which means a bird hand. So these guys are a pterosaur genus known from fragmentary fossils that were uncovered in the United Kingdom and possibly in Morocco. And this has a lot of different species, but a lot of them had been put into new genera these days. Several species have been referred to the genus, but now dubious or moved to different genera, and that leaves really only the type species, which is Ornithocheirus simus, which is found in the species referred to Ornithocheirus have been found in the mid-Cretaceous in North America, Europe, and South America, but this species simus is only known from the UK, with a possible individual from Morocco. So it has a bit of a weird taxonomic history. So these guys were first found in the 19th century in England. There was one found, these fragmentary fossils were found in the Cambridge greensand, which is an early Cretaceous sediment, and found there. Not very much is known, really just like a couple bits of the, the rostrum there, so not a lot known, and there's a lot of different species described, and I could probably go into it, but I'm kind of go through the formally assigned species. So, they found in 2013, after all these species have been described, Ornithocheirus is now monotypic and contains only Ornithocheirus simus, which is the type genus. And a lot of them had been moved or lumped or kind of moved into their own thing. So the kind of idea, I'll go talk about walking with dinosaurs. So the kind of idea, because all these fossils were quite similar, they thought that they kind of interpreted them with walking with dinosaurs as being the same species but being a globetrotter, like a lot of like modern albatrosses and things. But with more science and more evidence, it seems that... Why is that purple? That's interesting. It does seem to be purple. I think it's just the lighting. Anyway, with that, a lot of them were actually either lumped into their own genera, or or split into their own genera, or lumped into something else. So the original kind of specimen that we think of, the big giant Ornithocheirus from Walking with Dinosaurs from South America, is Tropicnathus, which is already in the game. By the way, so that was kind of the big one, and then all these other ones were some actually moved into Pterodactylus. Some were actually found to be in actually theropod bones, not actually pterosaur bones. So it actually got moved around quite a bit, so that's quite interesting as well. But in terms of its description itself, it's actually only known from the tip of the jaw, which has that characteristic heel, and it had relatively narrow jaw tips compared to Colobeuranchus and Tropicnathus, which are a little bit more defined as well. And as in the past, it was described to be one of the largest pterosaurs, or the largest pterosaurs to ever have lived, with a wingspan potentially up to 12 meters. But now this is highly exaggerated, and most likely the true Ornithocheirus simus, its wingspan would have been about 5 to 6 meters. or 4.5 to 6 meters. So that's actually quite comparable to things like Pteranodon and some other larger pterosaurs that were not astacids. So it's still a big animal, but nowhere near as big as it was in Walking with Dinosaurs. And the species Troglodytes was a little bit bigger, about 8 meters in wingspan. That's the specimen that we got the giant one from for Walking with Dinosaurs. That one was about 8 meters, which makes it the largest toothed pterosaur and probably the largest largest non-astacid pterosaur. So that's quite interesting as well. And in terms of where it fits in the family tree, there has been a little bit of taxonomy there. There is believed to be the own group, and there was a new genera, Thepudaganata, which actually thought to be a close relative of Ornithocheirids, or Ornithocheirus itself, and then they formed their own family, Ornithocheiridae, and within the group Ornithocheiriformes, which includes, a lot of, those famous relatives that I was kind of talking about before, like Tropicnathus and Appenguara and Iberodactylus and all them. So yeah, really, really cool. I really love that we got this Walking with Dinosaur skin, I love that iconic skin. Sadly, it was still a bit scaly, but, in the game they are a bit scaly. But still really, really cool to have pterosaurs like these. And I actually can't wait for pterosaurs in Prehistoric Kingdom. I think that's going to be amazing. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful animal. I love to see some Walking with Dinosaurs love, because, that's one of the formative things for, I think, a lot of paleo people. But yeah, amazing. Definitely a big fan. Right, that was another one done by Trippy, Trippy 13. Next up, we've got one that actually Trippy 13 only helped with. This next one is done by Netraptor. We have got Paralititan. So this guy's a bit of a unit. We'll have a look at you. Please speed around a bit. Oh yeah, my park's still open. That's alright, we'll sort that out soon. Nope. So this is a lovely Paralititan. So let's have a look at you in all your splendor. Looks like they're probably just gearing up to do their animation, to social each other. Anyway, look at that. Beautiful animal. And it's got the proper feet. Yeah, it's got the proper feet. Alright, we'll have to get back in position. Here we go. So that is Paralititan. Very, very cool animal Paralititan is. So Paralititan means tidal giant, and it's an extinct genus of titanosaur that lived in Egypt during the late Cretaceous. It was described by American paleontologist Joshua B. Smith and colleagues in 2001, and the genus itself contains a single species, Paralititan stromeri, named and based on the incomplete postcranial skeleton that included vertebrae and limb bones. So the fossils themselves were unearthed by an American expedition to the Baharina Oasis in western Egypt and rock layers from the Baharana Formation, and which date to the late Cenomanian of the late Cretaceous, so between 99 and 96 million years ago. And additionally, there actually was a incomplete dorsal or back vertebrae that had been described by the German paleontologist Ernest Stromer. You've probably heard of him if you know paleontology, back in 1932, and it was assigned to Paralititan. However, this vertebrae itself was actually destroyed in World War II with the bombing of Munich, which is a bit sad as well. So that kind of goes into its discovery. In terms of its size, it actually was one point actually considered one of the largest dinosaurs known. So it's up there with a lot of the giants. So, however, more recent estimates put it about 27 meters long and about 30 tons. So it's still a large animal, larger than most sauropods, but it's not as huge as animals such as Argentinosaurus or Poetosaurus. And it has quite a large humerus. Its humerus is about 5.5 feet long, or 1.69 meters. And its caudal vertebrae are wider than they're being tall, and they lack actually a lot of air sacs that like a lot of other sauropods have. So that's quite interesting as well. So really only about 5% of the skeleton is actually known of Paralititan. So there had been estimates of it potentially getting up to 70 tons, which would put it pretty much as the same as most other large titanosaurs. So things like Aristoceras and stuff. So it's definitely potentially up there. But what's different as well, it is basically a saltosaurid, so it's not that closely related to most of the other large titanosaurs. So it's a great example of convergence in size, typically. What's interesting as well, it doesn't have so the sacral vertebrae lack the spaces, as I mentioned, the air sacs, which make vertebrae lighter, and the absence of this actually is common amongst titanosaurs, which is a way to actually define them. And in contrast as well, it's not biconvex. The centrum is not biconvex in Paralititan. So it's quite interesting as well, way to define it. And it seems to be it's a little bit more similar to Brachiosaurus in some regards. And it has a feature that was only found in Brachiosaurus and Paralititan as well. As mentioned, it also got quite a large forelimb, about 5 meters in size, on height. And those kind of, it's got a lot of features that really show that it's its own species, some diagnostic features we'd call them. So in terms of its classification, it belongs in the group of sauropods called Lithostrata, Lithostroma, which is a group of sauropods that lived in pretty much every continent except Australia. And this group has a lot of sauropods, including Titan, Argentinosaurus, Nonocolotus, Alamosaurus, which are all comparable in size, a lot of these giants. But it's more specific as well. It actually, they recovered them as a saltosaurid, which is a group of, African, Asian, European, and North American sauropods that lived during the Cretaceous. And like other sauropods, they were herbivorous, and they also had osteoderms, so its relatives like Saltosaurus had osteoderms, and we don't have any osteoderms particularly from a Paralititan, but likely a lot of its relatives did, like Alamosaurus and things like that, so it likely would have had some sort of, even Alamosaurus, which is not that closely related to it, in the Osculocalinidae group, had osteoderms, so it's likely this was a feature of most of these saltosaurids, and it was a saltosaurine, so more closely related to things like Mexicalosaurus and Saltosaurus itself than it was to those other giants. So a great example of convergent evolution. So in terms of its paleo environment, these guys would have lived in kind of mud flats, like a mangrove and seed forest. That's where the fossils have been found, and it actually had been found as well with the new species now, Teratophoneus, which was originally this Caturus as well. And this mangrove system would have covered the Tethys Sea, bordered the Tethys Sea, which was a coastal environment with lots of waterways and tidal flats. These guys would have lived with theropods, like Teratophoneus or Temeraptor and Spinosaurus and Baharanosaurus, and also another large titanosaur potentially. Bellysaurs, like Rugops, I believe, and lots of sharks and crocodiles and stuff. So basically, you think of the Baharina formation, and there's a lot of overlap with the Chem. But Spinosaurus it would have lived with as well potentially. So Spinosaurus, Rugops, a lot of those guys would have been living with Paralititan, and this would have been the big guy on the block. Really only the babies would have got eaten. But yeah, really, really cool. So I think we'll let them finish their thing, because I want to actually let them go and make sure they let these animals out. I don't even know what they're doing there. These beautiful animals there. I really love this mod. And they give it the correct feet, which I always love to see. Because you just did a 360 just to do the nose thing. That's quite funny, actually. That's cool. Right, now get out of the way. I want to show off the next animal. So next up, very, very interestingly, first up I'm going to turn this pack off because it annoys me. Close pack. Next up we have got a very interesting animal. We've got Eocarcharia, and it looks like a Spinosaurus, but I'll get into its real interesting taxonomic history soon. We've got Eocarcharia as a spinosaurid, which is very interesting, but we'll get into that. And, of course, it does that to me. Glad that bug, I haven't found that bug yet in Jurassic World Evolution 3. which is good. Look at this beautiful guy. Anyway, this is Eocarcharia, which means dawn shark. So these guys were an extinct genus of theropod found in what is now the Western Tyranny Desert in Niger, and was found from the same place, well, not the same place, but the same sort of time, early Cretaceous, of the Eolar's formation, a little bit earlier than things like Paralititan. But yeah, not too much earlier, and it was described by Paul Sereno. And then the fossil material was described by Sereno and Steve Brissett. And it contains the single species Eocarcharia dinops. And while it was originally kind of found as a new Carcharodontosaurid, later studies actually suggest that it's actually two taxa, so it is a chimera. So there's bones that come from two different animals. So there's one, the holotype, which is the name-bearing specimen, likely actually belongs to a spinosaurid or baryonychine, so related to baryonyx. Well, the other part actually does belong to a Carcharodontosaurid, and it probably needs a new name. So this is because this part is the holotype. So technically, Eocarcharia is now considered a baryonychine rather than a Carcharodontosaurid, and they'll need a new genus to come up with a name for the more Carcharodontosaurid remains as well. But little is known of it because of its fragmentary nature, but when considered a Carcharodontosaurid, it got about 6 to 8 meters long, so made it smaller than things like Giganotosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus. So that's quite interesting as well. So it's interesting how, it is how it's become, these two different species. A great example of a chimera. So as a spinosaurid, in 2024, Andrew Cow actually kind of looked at these taxonomy and looked at that, and found out, okay, it is a baryonychine, and it suggests that it's actually closely related to things such as the Ceratophoneus, and which she shows that she has some features with Ceratophoneus, which is from the UK, and so it seems to be related kind of to the group, but shows many similarities within Suchomimus, Ceratophoneus, and Rhipivaveneta, so kind of that group of UK spinosaurs, which is very, very interesting. In terms of paleobiology, as I mentioned, we kind of don't know. It likely would have been very similar to other baryonychines in its behavior, fishing, all that kind of stuff. And in terms of its ecology, it would have lived with a lot of very interesting animals. It lived in the Eolar's group and the Timagara group formation there, so lived between 120 to 112 million years ago in that kind of early Cretaceous, and lived in floodplains. So it lived with Cryptonops, which is actually another chimera of which is potentially a bellisaurid and allisaurid material. Aphros mullus, which is noasaurid. Several megaherbivores such as Tyrannosaurus and Ludosaurus. Alonzosaurus, two different sauropods such as an unnamed titanosaur and Nigersaurus. There's with Sarcosuchus, which is another cool one. Pterosaurs, turtles, and bivalves. So very rich formation, lots of prey for this species to live. But yeah, I find it interesting, the taxonomic history. Now it's a chimera. So this is the Eocarcharia itself, is now a spinosaurid. And the other stuff that is definitely Carcharodontosaurid material needs to have its own genus name. So that's kind of how that kind of works. And they look beautiful there. Look at that beautiful posture. I love sauropods, man. I think sauropods are just so photogenic. When you take from this perspective of them, and you just think, wow, amazing. But anyway, we're going to carry on. So that was done by Netraptor as well. Netraptor and Trippy13 helped with that. So next up we have got, this is another one done by, as you guessed it, Trippy13. So this one is actually quite cool. This is Eotyrannus. So now we just had the Dawn Shark, now we have the Dawn Tyrant. So this is a very interesting little guy here. So Eotyrannus is a genus of Tyrannosaurid theropod, or Tyrannosaurid theropod, from the early Cretaceous Wessex formation in the Weldon group, and it's found in the Isle of Wight in the UK. So another British animal that we get to talk about. So its remains consist of an assorted skull, parts of the skeleton of a juvenile subadult found in plant debris clay bed, and was described in early 2001. And the etymology genus is the Tyrannosaur or tyrant lizard, so it's basically a dawn tyrant, so Eo, dawn, and Eotyrannus tyrant. So the exact location of the holotype has not been revealed, but it is found around the Isle of Wight, between the Alfield Point and Hanover Point as well. And then it was taken to the University of Portsmouth to be examined, and then it was named in 2001. Eotyrannus was given that name to honour Mr. Lang as well, with a specific name, Lange, to honour Mr. Lang. And the material was then described briefly in 2001 by Hutt et al. And then in July 2018, Darren Naish, who was a colleague of Hutt, helped produce the preliminary descriptions and actually created a GoFundMe to create the monograph for this species. And then that monograph was released in 2022. So that's quite interesting there. In terms of its description, there are a lot of like little things, really little things. Like you have to be a paleontologist to notice these things, really. Difference in the bones that really set it apart, that is different from other things. But those kind of show that these guys corroborates the notion that these early tyrannosauroids were quite gracile little things. They had long forelimbs and 3-fingered hands. And the somewhat, the larger size and the 2-fingered hands would have become a thing later. And considering to where this guy is related, they put the finds of this animal in Europe puts the question of the purported Asian origin of these animals, along with animals such as Stoxosaurus in North America and Eotyrannus from Europe, which suggests that these guys are actually a little bit more common. We don't know exactly where tyrannosaurids came from, but its closest relatives are Dilong and orangutan, so it seems to have some interesting relatives there. And actually a 2014 analysis actually suggested it was a Megaraptoran, but then it kind of now considered the 2022 osteology by Nash and Cow. Now it considers them to be more closely related to Eotyrannus and Zhejiang. So that's kind of where they kind of fit. So a little bit more basal on the tree, which is interesting. But in terms of how it lived in the Wessex Formation, where it was found was considered to be quite warm and humid, similar to the present-day Mediterranean. And at this time, there would have been lots of, equatorial paleoclimate of about 20 degrees. A little bit more drought-resistant as well, so not quite as wet as the UK is today. And it would have lived with animals such as Neovenator, Hypsilophodon, Ceratophoneus and Rhiparovenator, Iguanodon, Entelosaurus, Bristonius, Osteopus, and Prolacanthus. So those species are probably quite familiar to you guys. And those are what these guys would have lived with. So it's really cool that we actually know a lot about this dinosaur. So that's very, very cool. And it's important to know about it because, it talks about the history of everyone's favourite T-Rex. So it's quite an important animal to understand. But yeah, we'll let them run off and do their thing, and then we're moving on to our last animal. So this one was a collaborative effort. Teratophoneus was done by That One Glitch, and then Tripp and Mayo. They all combined their forces to make Teratophoneus. So this is one I had covered before, but we're going to cover him again because, this is a nice mod. So this is Teratophoneus, which means monstrous murderer in Greek. So this is a genus of tyrannosaurian theropod that came from the late Campanian age of the late Cretaceous, so between 76 to 75 million years ago, and lived in now Utah. And the fossils, it contains a single species, Teratophoneus currii, which honors the paleontologist Philip J. Currie. And is known from an incomplete skull and postcranial skeletons coming from the Caparowits. So they were first found in the Caparowits in fossils from southern Utah, and argon dating suggests the formation where they came from was about 76 to 74 million years ago. And there have been several fossils of the species being found. There's a few there's the holotype itself was found, as I mentioned there, but there's a few other fossils that have been found as well. In terms of its description, according to Carr et al., these guys would have got to about 6 meters long, or about 20 feet, and weighed about 700 or so kilograms. So not huge animals. More recent estimates put them at about 6 meters to about a ton. Biggest ones probably about, some have put them out to 8 meters, but the most recent estimates suggest that at like a subadult about 6 meters. Though that same year there was the only known articulated specimen was they found the maximum adult length to be about 8 or 9 meters. So that's up there, very much. 8 or 9 meters is kind of considered medium theropod size. So up there, that's comparable in size with things like a Bertosaurus as well. So that's the kind of size there. But very, very cool animal. In terms of how it's related, it is a member of the Tyrannosaurinae, so it is related to animals such as Spinosaurid and vice versa, and also kind of Eotyrannus and all them. And then in 2020, with the genus Thanatorestes described, these guys are actually put into their own group, the Teratophoneus. So they are related, they're in Teratophoneus, their own family, but still related to Diamantera and Eotyrannus and all that, which is interesting. And there is potentially evidence of social behavior in this species. There is a bone bed found in the Rainbows and Unicorns quarry in southern Utah, and the Caturus. There's just these guys may have been social pack hunters. And these fossils contain about 4 or possibly 5 animals that range from about 4 to 22 years of age. And they suggest that it was a mass mortality event. They all died together, potentially because of flooding, or potentially a sign of bacterial toxicosis or fire or drought. And these, the fact that they all kind of died in the short time period suggests that they are gregarious, so all hang out together, which is quite interesting. But yeah, this is another animal with a lot of interesting, rich formation. So the holotype itself from the Caturus, and from 76 million years ago. At the time, America was still split by the Western Interior Seaway, but that was starting to kind of close up. And the areas it would have lived in would have been very wet and like a floodplain, so lots of different animals living there, very rich formation. And would have lived with animals such as the Troodontotalos, Ornithocheirus, different types of oviraptorids, the Ankylosaur, and Calycephalus, also hadrosaurs such as Paralititan, and Gyptosaurus, Eotyrannus, Pseudoceratops, Cosmoceratops, would have been dinosaurs that would have lived with. And we also have other fauna from there as well. It's not just dinosaurs. We have lots of sharks and rays, frogs, salamanders, turtles, lizards and crocodilians, and Dinosaurs would have been living there as well. So potentially that would have been some competition, and potentially would have eaten Teratophoneus, because we all know Dinosaurs is quite a large crocodile, could potentially eat Teratophoneus. And there was also, very interestingly, a large variety of mammals that included multituberculates, marsupials, and insectivorans, which is now considered a defunct group, but a very interesting group of little animals there. But yeah, I think that's about finishes everything up for today. So yeah, really, really cool. I really love these little guys. Definitely very, very awesome. The great mod. Hopefully we get a few more parts out of this yet. We'll keep going until it's, we'll run it to the ground, because why not? But yeah, very, very awesome. So yeah, I'm going to thank everyone. Thank you, Trippy, for all those mods. I'm not going to list them all. You did most. You had a part in pretty much every mod here today. But yeah, thank you, that one glitch and Mayo, for working on that Teratophoneus, and Netraptor for your Eocarcharia and Paralititan. They're all pretty awesome. So yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always look at the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe.